Hello, folks. Another episode of Burning Platform. I have with me today good friend and analyst Tim Crawford. Tim, why don't you introduce yourself, brag about yourself for a couple of minutes, and then we'll jump into a lot of different trends. I mean, it's an exciting time for the industry in general, even though people are fretting about layoffs and so on. I'm pretty excited about it. So thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for the invite, Vinnie. And it was great to see you just recently again. It's always great to catch up and kind of compare notes as we go through the slogfest of conferences, going from one to the next. Right, our travel dance card keeps getting full. So Tim Crawford, I'm CIO and strategic advisor with AVOA. I'm a former CIO and have led IT organizations most of my career, but I also serve as an independent analyst. And so I bridge between working with other CIOs and their executive teams, as well as working with vendors and helping them understand kind of how the CIO is changing their thinking and how they're evolving. So lots of different areas that we can talk about, and looking forward to getting into that with you.
So why don't we start macro and then drill down, and we kind of end up at Sapphire where we last met, and we can talk about that small vendor called SAP at the end. But let's start with the micro. Why don't we start with clearly being a former CIO, you look at the world much broader than just JavaScript and technology. You look at broad trends. So tell me what you're seeing from an economic point of view, and how is that affecting the technology market?
It's complicated. It's not it's depends. It's complicated. And as we were kind of rounding the end of last year and heading into the first calendar quarter of this year, we saw a lot of folks that were telegraphing that they're cutting their budgets, when in reality, most of them privately were just delaying the spend on their budgets.
Sure.
And what that means is that as you kind of get to Q3, Q4, you're going to start to see folks that potentially could be trying to spend some of those dollars at the last minute. Now, that's assuming that the macroeconomic conditions that we're seeing both here in the US and globally are improving. And unfortunately, we have not seen that yet. And so I fully suspect that we'll see probably a continuation of this spend level going into Q3, Q4 of this calendar year, which won't be any different than what we're seeing today. Now, what that means from a CIO perspective is refocusing into those areas that really mean significant business value. So if it's tied to customer engagement, it's tied to employee engagement, it's tied to business operations and efficiency. Those are the three key areas that really make a difference for a company. If you have to connect a lot of dots between some technology or some process and one of those three cores, good luck getting funding for it. So that's been kind of the general gist, is a movement toward those things that have low risk or trying to limit the risk or hedge the risk, but really focused on significant business outcomes. So I do think that this economic downturn or the macroeconomic conditions that we're seeing have actually had a positive impact to cause people to really kind of rethink their portfolio and how their spend is being applied. But there is spend happening. So this is not a story of, okay, nobody's spending anything. People are spending, but they're being very judicious about it.
So Tim, I'll talk about a couple of things that I'm seeing. I'm not just like you, I'm partly an advisor, partly an analyst, but I'm also an author. And the last couple of years, I've had two C-level thought leadership books that I've helped facilitate. One of them was for SAP. So two of their executives, basically, the theme was we've had four shocks in a row: COVID, the Ukraine crisis, climate change urgency is increasing, accelerating, right? And we've had digital transformation, not necessarily in those 4 years, but we are starting to see the impact of massive decade of digital transformations.
Mm-hmm.
How have these shocks change industries. And, everyone says, oh, yeah, industries have changed. But when I worked with them and I interviewed a lot of their customers, I was shocked at how much change has happened, right? So we've seen some new applications emerge in the last 3, 4 years that we didn't imagine. We couldn't have imagined, right? So curbside check-in, a curbside pickup in retail, right? I mean, 4 years ago, you're like, oh, well, I'm just going to go into the store. What the hell is curbside check-in, pickup, right? E-commerce returns. 20% of e-commerce is returned. You can't expect a store associate to make a decision. I'm going to restock this or refurbish this. You need a very sophisticated reverse logistics process. That's become a new application area. EV, battery charging, and billing, right? Billing on a roaming basis because you're away from your home, just like in telecom roaming charges, it's come to EV batteries, right? 4 years ago, we didn't need that, right? Telemedicine has been around for 20 years, took off during the pandemic. So there's a lot of what I call vertical edge applications that have emerged because industries dramatically have changed, right? And I think most CIOs know what's happening to their business. I think the vendor community is slightly behind. SAP was ahead of the curve in that they saw many of these edge opportunities open up. A lot of people are like, well, they don't even know anything about retail logistics, right? So they're not going to exactly have an application that could apply to returns management. So that's one big change I'm seeing, at least in the Western world. The other big change I'm seeing is I went to India for a month earlier in the year. And I used to take a lot of CIOs there for outsourcing and so on, but I hadn't been there in about 5 years. It just blew me away, the vibrant economy. They're kind of catching up to 3 years of lost time during COVID, and they're in such a hurry, right? But what I heard over and over again was, well, sure, the West is important to us, but we are doing as much business with the Middle East. We're doing as much business with Indonesia, the BRICS countries, Nigeria, and so new markets are emerging that are completely excluding the US and Europe quite often, right? And I don't think the application vendors have much presence in most of these markets. And if you ask them, hey, would you support Indonesia? They're like, I can't make money there. I mean, that's a usual answer. That doesn't mean someone like Zoho isn't going to sell there, right? So I'm seeing from an economic perspective some major shifts happening, and I worry that the technology vendors aren't completely clued into what's going on.
Yeah.
So, and not to be negative, I think it's an opportunity. I'm telling them, hey guys, it'll take investment. Don't just pretend that your existing stuff will work in these countries or the vertical edge applications. You can just pretend that you have it, right? So,
yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Vinny. And if I kind of maybe double click on what I said earlier about some of the economic conditions and the different things that have been a huge impact to business over the last 3 to 5 years. I mean, of course, the pandemic being one of those has really kind of brought into relief, the geopolitical instability in these different countries. And so now, instead of working with one given country to do manufacturing, now I might need to work with 2 or 3 or 4 different countries to do manufacturing. And at a moment's notice, I may need to shift it from one to the next. These are things that we never had to deal with in the past. And in fact, we actually worked against it. I mean, if you think about just in time and a lot of the Deming's teachings, and Toyota and others that had really kind of driven
inventory. Yeah.
Right. Inventory management, supply chain management. I mean, there was a very distinct way of doing that. And really in the last few years, it kind of threw that all into the mix of saying, well, maybe we went a little too far into just in time. And now we don't have the flexibility to be able to relate and respond to the changing dynamics that our customers and our partners and ecosystem are demanding. And you're right, these companies weren't prepared for that. both the end user customer as well as the vendors that are supplying products to them. But this is exactly what they need to do. And they need to actually get ahead of it and not be responsive to it, but they need to get ahead of it and be monitoring how those shifts are happening. So when a customer comes to them and says, Vinnie, I need help with X, they're like, no problem. We see it coming. Here you go.
You know,
We're not there yet.
One of the other things a couple of conversations I've had recently, if you look at multinationals are having to shuffle their global commitments at a faster rate than I've ever seen. So
that's right.
A lot of them are moving out of Russia. They were forced to move out of Russia, right?
Yep.
Others are rebalancing China exposure, right? So it's China plus one. I've talked to a couple who go Argentina and a couple of other countries have runaway inflation. I got to move away from that. So the I don't think I've ever seen that much shuffling of where are my global investments, right? That's not easy to do.
No, it isn't.
Because a lot of their systems are very country specific, and suddenly backing up and moving means a new set of technologies and so on. The other thing I did was another book I wrote was for IFS, which is a European industrial ERP company. And the theme there was around what's called servitization. It's a trend where product companies, complex product companies, are finding that no matter how innovative the products, the Chinese can come up with a version 3 years later at half the price, right? So just being dependent on product sales is a slippery slope. So many of them have been bundling monitoring services, maintenance services, financing, into a very complex outcome-based contract. So Rolls-Royce, for example, aerospace, they don't sell engines anymore. You cannot go to them and say, I want to buy this engine.
That's right.
They'll sell it to you as a service, pay by the hour, right? So but to be able to do that, they have digital twins for every one of their engines. They can tell when a component is about to fail. They can swap from one engine to another because they own the asset. They haven't sold the asset, right? But it's complex because you need a CPQ that can handle not just product or service, but also financing, spare parts, the whole shebang to support a life cycle of an industrial asset.
Yeah.
That trend is fascinating. From my research, I found about 5,000 or 6,000 companies around the world are on that journey. Not easy, but it's going to either help them survive or not. So that's another big trend.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think as companies start to think about maybe moving more toward a subscription model, they're going to also find where those boundaries are too. So for example, you mentioned Rolls-Royce, and I'm also familiar with that example, but look at what I think it's BMW that recently announced that they're thinking about moving to a subscription model for features in vehicles. Do you want heated seats? Well, that's, $1 more a month. Sure. Do you want, cruise control? Do you want this feature, that feature? And so it'll add up. I don't know how far that will go. And I think we have to be careful that it doesn't come across from an experience standpoint as the customer being nickeled and dimed. But I think in some models, it absolutely makes sense and actually makes it easier for the customer, the end customer, to actually manage their whole work stream, their whole value chain. So I do think that will be interesting to see how it plays out. But going back to the flexibility,
a couple of the industrial manufacturers that I interviewed, they said, "Hey, look, Vinnie, my customers are already pushing back. They're like, give me a truck. You want to sell it to me as a service? I find it I have enough capital, at least for now. I want to buy it because then I can keep it for 20 years rather than being forced to upgrade every 5 years or whatever, right?" And so just because you offer it as a service doesn't mean your customers will necessarily want to buy it that way. Same thing with BMW, right? They'll get pushed back.
They will. But I think this is where we have to help these companies that are selling products to customers, as well as the customers themselves, to help them rethink and reimagine their business, but then also how the tools have to evolve to be able to accommodate that. And all of this is driven by the customer, right? As the customer changes their buying habits and how they engage with companies and the experiences that they want, right? It's no longer just a SKU or a product, it's the experience. I mean, it kind of harks back to the days of Nordstrom, where yes, they sell great products, but it's really, you go there for the experience and the experience you have in acquiring that product. I think we're back to rethinking those experiences. And that's something that requires a degree of imagination that folks on both sides of the equation, both the end users as well as the vendors, are trying to very quickly get up to speed with. But they're challenged with that. They're challenged with doing so.
The funny thing is, for the IFS book, it's called Moment of Service. So the CEO is very, very acutely focused on, in an industrial sale, we get about 20 or so moments of service. You delight a customer or you disappoint them. And every one of those can hurt you along the way, right? So as part of the interviews, all the executives, I would end with, I'd say, tell me a really positive experience and tell me a really negative experience, right? So it's kind of fascinating to have these executives talk about what they personally were excited by and not excited by, right? So I think your point about experience is right on. We've become very, very sensitive to what is the experience, especially at certain points in the sales cycle or product ownership cycle and so on. Let's switch gears. Let's talk about the hottest or the most hyped technology buzzword, generative AI.
Can we spell it?
You sound like a better you have a better vocabulary. What would you say?
Yeah, so
the hype cycle is still early, or
no, I think we're actually starting to round the top end of it. If we kind of pull one of our colleagues from Gartner out and pull out their hype cycle chart, I think we're definitely kind of crossing the top of the hype cycle and starting to head toward that trough of disillusionment. And I do think that enterprises are really starting to understand that there are some great things that generative AI can bring to the table, but there are also some things that you really have to be careful about. And if you don't, I was just at an event at Qualcomm just this week, and one of the speakers was talking about this is something you cannot afford to miss. There are some things you can kind of sit back and wait and see how they play out. This is not one of those. Like if you wait, you die. But at the same time, that doesn't mean you jump in with both feet without having your eyes open. You have to think through what are some of the risks to going down this path, because generative AI, while it does a lot of great things for you and has the potential to do a lot of great things for you, every once in a while, it goes off the rails. And so you have to be able to recognize that. And you have to understand how you're using it. And then there's the whole legal framework and then regulatory. I was on a call earlier this week with the gentleman who is leading the charge for the European Union on AI regulation in the EU. And it was a fascinating conversation. It's not a trivial thing to do. We need some sort of guardrails for everybody, kind of rules to the game, but at the same time, that's easier said than done. So we still have to figure out how this plays out, but there's a lot more work to be done.
I have a slightly provocative perspective on the EU when it comes to this. To me, what we don't have in the enterprise, confusing. There's a lot of excitement from a consumer perspective, right? Hey,
that's right.
I'll redo my resume. If I'm a student, I'll be able to do my college essays will be done for me and all that. In the enterprise, I'm not convinced we have enough data, partly because of things like GDPR and so on, partly because many of the vendors we know and love came from the mainframe and on-premise data center world, right? It's locked up in proprietary data centers, right? And what they have in the cloud, other than a few of them, they don't have permissions to use that data, right? So I
I'm
worry
get
that the machines will not have enough data to really learn effectively. Okay, um, that's one worry of mine. And vendors are being, depending on who you talk to, they're like, they, they blow it off and go, no, no, I got enough data. But I'm not convinced of that.
I I actually will take a contradictory view to that, which I think we have enough data. I do think we have the problem where the data is in silos, and we're starting to see products from Microsoft and SAP and others that are helping kind of bring that data together. That's the possible, the art of the possible. Um, but when you start to look at those technologies, I mean, there's a cultural component to this too, whether you're talking about, Fabric from Microsoft, whether you're talking about DataSphere from SAP, there's a cultural component of being able to unlock that data. Assuming you get to that point, I do think that we do have a lot of data that we can start to build really insightful decisions off of today. And in fact, some of the more forward thinking organizations are thinking backwards and going, okay, we have these huge models that we're building these algorithms on top of, but those are huge models and we can't consume those. So how do you start to use maybe a smaller model that has a similar degree of confidence, but can still output something that is valuable for your decision-making process? So I don't think generally for the enterprise, I don't think it's a matter of we don't have enough data. Now, when you get into research, if you're talking about cancer research or some of the other research arms, there I do think, if we could unlock the data, that'd be great. But I think there's still more to be learned. I don't think it's a matter of not having enough data. I think it's a matter of how do we use the data and how do
Oh
we
yeah,
get access to use it effectively.
the enterprise use cases I've heard so far have been mostly HR related, but
That's right.
document written copious writing is involved, right? So
Mhm.
legal, HR, and so on. One worry of my there is, what is going to be the cost of auditing the results from the AI, right? I mean, I've written 9 books in the last decade, and I still can't do text, speech to text automated transmission beyond 91, 92% accuracy, which is worse than useless because to be able to come up with the rest of the 8, 9%, you got to go through and listen to the darn thing over and over again, right?
That's
But
right.
doing that in the generative AI till we have good audit trails and so on, we'll be spending a lot of time making sure that it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
People worry about bias. I worry about accuracy.
Well, I think we're conflating a couple of terms here, Vinny, that's important to kind of segregate. And that's the difference between generative AI and AI,
Oh,
right? Or
I know. I was giving you the transcription example.
of course, and there is a generative component to that. But I think where most people are today and where most of these systems are today has nothing to do necessarily with generative AI. We're still living in that AI, and actually, even some of that is machine learning. We're not bringing that cognitive component into the mix yet. We will someday, but there's a lot of AI washing and Gen AI washing that's happening right now that is somewhat irrelevant for the conversation and confusing, and it's just creating noise. And I think people like you and I need to part the ways and help guide those folks so that they can understand where it's meaningful and where it's not.
The other thing I've seen from talking to at least a few vendors is they're worried about using OpenAI because it
Mhm.
then becomes, the IP
It's public data.
public data, right? So I've talked to a couple of vendors who are thinking of building their own using open source tools, right? So I don't think the plumbing is uh, cleanly defined yet. So I would say we're still in the hype cycle going up only because I don't see enough use cases or technology really ready. So vendors are just kind of, they have to have a position and they're presenting their early early thoughts.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm being too harsh.
I do think that as we go through time and more companies, more end users are able to use the technology. So let's take SAP for a minute. If you look at SAP, many of those customers are running an on-prem instance of SAP. So how do they take advantage of some of this newer technology that's coming out? And it's much more challenging for them as compared with someone that might be using SAP Cloud, right? And then plugging in BTP and the rest into the mix. I do think one, organizationally, what is your, and I talk a lot about this when I get into assessments of IT orgs, but what is your organizational capacity? What are you capable of organizationally? You might have an aspirational goal of, hey, we want to be able to leverage all of this new fangled technology into what we do. And that's great from an aspirational standpoint. But if you don't have the culture and the organizational structure and the mindset and the education to be able to adopt that technology, it might as well be, some foreign language to you, because you're not going to be able to do it effectively. And this is where I think the opportunity is for many of these vendors, like an SAP, like a Zoho, like others, is that when they can embed it where it's just part of the core technology that then the consumer or the end user can just tap into and leverage, that's where I think it becomes really valuable. But these kind of Lego building block models with AI and generative AI, I think those are going to be harder unless you are of a larger company or a very specialized use case to be able to consume that.
That is a good point. Problem is when it becomes part of the platform, right? Small
Yes.
applications where users don't even notice. Vendors then will go, I can't differentiate. Everyone is is showing
Right.
something similar, right?
I
So
mean, Vinny, think back to this goes back a few years, but think back when Salesforce came out with Einstein,
yeah,
right? And Einstein was not intended to be a separate product. It was just built in. It's like now powered with, X product. That's what we need to be
yeah,
seeing, because as companies start to move up the stack in terms of where their focus is, focusing more on those business outcomes as opposed to the underlying plumbing, as you said, we're going to need to have that automated. We're going to need to have that just built in. I can't, as a CIO, I cannot build the expertise. Assuming I could find the people and assuming I could afford the people, two big ifs, I don't have the organizational capability to put together that center of excellence around that specific technology. There isn't a value proposition for that for most companies. And so that's where I think we have to step back and say, what's the appropriate way to start to consume some of these technologies? And then consequently, what's the opportunity for those vendors? And where does it get applied in such a way that it becomes valuable for those customers, right? This isn't peanut butter. We're not spreading it across everything within a given company's portfolio, but where is it best leveraged? And I think that's where we start to hit that pay dirt.
yep. So you mentioned SAP, so why don't we drill down into Sapphire? You and I were both in Orlando last week. They're in Barcelona this week and Sao Paulo next week. So it's kind of been, they've kind of shuffled Orlando used to be the big center of
That's
the
right.
world in May, and now they've kind of split it around the world. So tell me your thoughts from Orlando. What did you like, and what would you do differently? Yeah, so just
Yeah. And you and I both have to be careful about what's under NDA, what's not. I think on the whole, one of the things that I was excited to see is the way that SAP is thinking about their strategy and attacking customers. Probably not the best word to use, but going after customers and acquiring customers into the fold. Historically, SAP has had a problem where they focus on their base. And one of the things we heard very clearly was they're starting to go down market, which I think starts to kind of fill into this gap where you have these smaller players that are trying to go up market, which is a struggle. And you have now SAP that's trying to come down market. That'll be really interesting, especially with some of the tools they have. I was excited to hear how they're thinking about infusing AI into the different products. I think that's a definite hit and a positive thing for customers. I'm still struggling with the BTP messaging. I mean, BTP is a crown jewel for SAP, and anyone that has started to work with it starts to see how this becomes kind of that connective tissue for bringing these SAP pillars together. But I do think they're going to have some challenges around some of these terms. Like they're pushing the clean core message pretty hard, which in concept, I completely agree with. You've got to be able to go down this path of separating the customization from the core. But I think the term is a little, it's not gonna resonate as strongly. Similarly, I think the green ledger is another one that we heard a lot about, and I think the timing's a little off on that one. But all that being said, I do think that when you start to get into some of these pillars around success factors and some of the other pillars around S4 and what they're doing, and the data sphere pieces that was announced before Sapphire, but I think that's a huge piece that layers in on top of and kind of in the weave of all of these pillars. And that's really exciting. I do think that they're going to have to think about how they engage with customers, because as they go down market, that's not a large enterprise. And so the customer success team is going to have their hands full in terms of rethinking that process. And then I think the other one is just the whole CX in industries. And so if you look at customer experience and how they're engaging with customers to talk about that, I think there's a little more work they could do there. I do like how they're thinking about industries. I think that's a strength for them. So a little bit of a mixed bag, but on the whole, I'd say I was really kind of coming out of it with a positive view of the potential of where they're headed. How about you?
Oh, a lot to unpack. I mean, one of the comments I heard from fellow analysts was, this is how SAP keynotes used to be 5 years ago. A lot of product, a lot less, leadership and inspirational speakers and bands and so on. So I like that. A lot more product focus. I thought there was a little too much S4HANA focus in between Rise and Grow. I mean, they have all these programs they have launched in the last couple of years, variants of on the same product, right? Not because they don't, it is their biggest product now, so I expected a decent amount of coverage, but it then doesn't allow them to talk about it. When I helped them with the book, I learned so much about the industry capabilities. We didn't see enough of that. I mean, Kristen talked about the industry networks they're bringing out, right? Like
Right.
So, I mean, that itself could spend half a day on. Like you said, CX, they have a lot of capabilities across industries, but it kind of didn't get enough time, right? In terms of technology, I thought BTP actually, especially what they've done with Signavio, so being able to define the business process there and then feed that into BTP, I think that is very powerful. I'm not convinced it's as simple as it looks and low code as it looks. Julia, the CMO, did the demo. I was like, wow, a marketing person can do this, right? I'm not sure in real life it's that simple, right? But looks good. I was actually a little bit underwhelmed by the AI part, because they focused on success factors, the Microsoft integration with success factors. I would have thought they would, and again, it's everybody is evolving. I would have liked to see some unique operational AI from some other industries they're very good at. I mean, like they have banking software. they could have presented something on under the Pioneer software they have, right? So
Yeah.
success factors was kind of a, I guess, a broad audience because HR is excited about, how do I get job descriptions and all that out of Gen AI. But
And one thing, Vinny, just on that point, if I could, keep in mind that Sapphire is the broader conference for SAP, but like with Success Factors, their Success Connect conference, which I attended last year, is hardcore HR,
sure,
right?
yeah, and same thing. They have industry specific events, right?
Right. That's right.
The challenge is, as Julia responded to one of my questions. She was saying, I only had an hour in the keynote to present packing a lot of stuff there. So, overall, I thought the vibe was very positive because people hadn't seen each other in 2, 3 years. The vibe was very positive. And I like the fact that they had so many product announcements that we're bitching about not being able to, they didn't present enough of them individually.
Yeah.
So that's.
But the other thing that was good, you mentioned Julia, and I had an opportunity for a one-on-one with her, and I've known Julia for a number of years from her time at Microsoft, and we did some things at Microsoft together. One of the things that I thought was actually really good was when she walked through the process of making the ice cream. Right. And we had an opportunity as analysts to kind of go through the show floor and talk through the process. And I think for customers, that kind of brings a lot of this conversation about these different pillars to life, because you can see firsthand, like SAP has a fashion experience in their New York office that will take you all the way through from the website, through all of the parameters that they're tracking, through the store experience and inventory management and the rest. And when you see this tangible kind of in front of you experience, it puts it all to life. It's harder to see that when you've got slideware of, okay, let's show you some demos and whatnot. And so I was really kind of encouraged to see that on the floor with the ice cream example. And I'd like to see them do more of those,
Yeah,
because
actually,
I think that helps customers along.
I've seen their Industry 4.0 Experience Center,
Mm-hmm.
robotics and sensors on the shop floor. And I've also seen their Retail Intelligence Center, which shows a store with all kinds of cameras and sensors and so on. So they're probably more than other application vendors. They do invest in these experience centers. The really impressive thing is they can pull that out of a static location and bring it to the show floor in Orlando and now in Barcelona.
That's right.
That is quite a feat to be able to do that. So
That's
that's
right.
right. That was pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I think the last thing that I just kind of talked to is just the modernization of the enterprise. And we're seeing this kind of bring this full circle back to where we started this conversation and talk about the macroeconomic conditions and rethinking your portfolio. One of the areas that I am seeing enterprises spend is in their ERP, in these core pillared areas. And the reason for that is because they realize that they need all the flexibility that we've talked about, right? Whether it's geopolitical instability, whether it's in-country changes or dynamics in the supply chain, how the customer engagement experience is changing, how we're looking at employees and sourcing employees. I mean, all of these issues are on the table. And one of the things that forward-thinking CIOs are realizing is they have to figure out how to bring this together. No longer can we operate with these core pillars in silos. They're all integrated together. And so one of the things that I am going to be looking for as we go forward is how companies like SAP are bringing those pillars together, because I think that is the future of where we're going to be. And then you start to layer in things like intelligence around AI and whatnot. Now you're talking about those insights that are being put in front of you rather than you asking the question, and you get into things like prompt engineering and the rest. So it's an exciting time for sure.
I slightly disagree with you on that.
Okay.
2 reasons. My age is showing here. I've always found that once something is digitized, you pave that cow path. If you keep repaving it, your ROI consistently goes down. And I worry that ERP has been around. I was part of the team at Gartner that coined it in the mid 90s. And here we are 30 years later, still telling people upgrade, don't clean core, all that, right? So
Yeah,
that's one concern of mine. The other point is I find innovation is usually happens at the edge of organizations. So
it does.
what we've seen with warehouse bots in the last few years, just the amazing amount of productivity there. What we're seeing, in different parts of the enterprise, field management now, that's where the real payback is coming. So I agree with you. A clean core, good data is important, but you also want value from technology. And I'm not sure you're going to get that just from ERP.
No, and I don't know that I disagree with that point. I do think that you need to streamline how you think about ERP much more than you did 30 years ago. I mean, I went through two S3 upgrades, in past lives, and that was incredibly painful.
R3, you mean?
Right?
R3.
R3, great. R3, excuse me. And so, when you go through that process, there's a lot of work involved and there's a lot of question. It's something I used to tell my teams all the time, which is just because we can configure something doesn't mean we should. And so there's a different mindset that I think that needs to come out. And so we might still call it ERP, but I think it's a different way that we think about business operations. And maybe that's the better term to bring into the conversation.
It is, because if you talk about ERP, then people assume it's a package, and there's so much baggage around the term over the last,
Of course.
the overruns, the upgrades, the painful. I mean, if I had every CIO who says, I don't want another ERP on my resume,
Yeah.
because very few of them talk fondly about, hey, it was a great experience.
No, I'm not one of those either. I mean, I mentioned it today, but you won't find it on my CV. I mean, those are hard times. I mean, those are hard times. I think today the world's very different in terms of the technology and how you can use the technology. But I agree with you. I mean, there are some modernization in terms of how you operate your business, and we need to simplify our business operations. Because that then leads to the ability to be more nimble and flexible as our customers are pulling us in different directions.
Well, we didn't disagree much. Yeah. We could have yelled at each other and
No, you're too nice of a guy.
no, save that for vendors. Save the shouting matches with vendors.
uh, let's bring a vendor in and then we'll have at it.
No, enjoy Memorial Day. Thank you very much.
Likewise.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Vinnie. I appreciate the opportunity and have really enjoyed the conversation. I'm looking forward to seeing you in person again soon.
Yeah, let's do this every few months.
I'd like that. I'd like
Let's
that a
do an
lot.
update on generative AI. See if it's moved up the other side of the hype curve that quick.
Or if it's down further on the curve.
Be an optimist.
Uh,
Thank you, Ted.